So I see why you want me to just go back 75 years. That's when the War of Independence by the Israelites was won by the Jews, and they got their own country, 1948 to 1949. But it's a weirdly arbitrary place to stop because there's centuries of history, in fact, thousands of years of history going back further that would better explain why we are seeing conflict in this area still. And to just stop at 75 years discounts all of that. If in fact it was just 75 years of history, this would probably be a lot easier to administer. But the fact of the matter is there's hundreds, if not thousands, of years of history for both the Jews and the Palestinians. And I'll talk about that here. Going backwards in time, let me tell you the origins of this whole situation. So before 1949, at the end of World War II, we had the British Mandate. From 1920 to 1948, this was post-World War I, the League of Nations granted Great Britain a mandate to govern the region, which included present-day Israel and Jordan. The mandate aimed to prepare their territory for self-rule yet again, but there was a lot of challenges, obviously, because there was conflicts between Jewish and Arab communities on who should get what and who should be ruling. Before that, we had the Ottoman Empire, which ran from 1617 to 1917, which was right up until World War I, where the Ottoman Empire fought against the U.S., Brits, and the French. And the region was part of a Turkish-controlled rule of the Ottoman Empire out of Istanbul. Now, the Ottomans' rule of the area was administered out of Jerusalem. They created basically a province with a governorship to manage it, but it was the Ottoman Empire that controlled Jerusalem from 1517 to 1917 and present-day Israel. Before that, you had the Islamic Mamluk Sultanate of Egypt. So basically, Egypt, in some form, controlled this area from 1250 to 1517. It spanned from the 13th century to the 16th century. And the Mamluks, who were slave soldiers, ruled the region after defeating the Ayyubids, and I'll talk about them next, and then later repelling the Mongol invasion. Now, the Ayyubid dynasty was from 1171 to 1250. You may have heard of the ruler. His name was Saladin. Saladin was the head of the Muslim rule that ejected the Christians from the Kingdom of Jerusalem. You saw this in the movie Kingdom of Heaven. And the Muslims retook the area from the Christians that had conquered it during the Crusades. They ruled from 1171 to 1250. Next up, as I said, we had the Christian Kingdom of Jerusalem from 1099 to 1291. After the Crusades, the First Crusade really, European Christians established a series of Crusader states, including Jerusalem, which lasted for a couple hundred years. They took this area over from the Fatimid Caliphate that ran it from 909 to 1171. This was an Ismaili Shia Muslim caliphate, and it stretched a huge span of territory from North Africa to Iraq and the Levant, including Israel proper as we see it today. Before that, there was the Byzantine Empire. The Byzantines split off from the Roman Empire in the 4th century, and they ruled over what is present-day Israel and maintained the control of the region for about 300 years. And incidentally, it was during the Byzantine occupation of the land that Islam was formed in 610 AD. Before that, Islam as a religion didn't exist. This was nearly 1,500 years after Jewish people lived in Israel, and I'll get to them in a bit. Now, before the Byzantine Empire, there was the Roman Empire from 63 BC to 330 AD. The Romans controlled the land, and they were the ones to actually rename the area from Judea to Palestina, which is where we get modern-day Palestine. Before the Roman Empire, it was the Hasmonean dynasty, which lasted about 100 years from 140 to 37 BC. This was the brief period where the Jewish people independently ruled themselves there after the Maccabean revolt. And they took over from the Seleucid Empire. The Seleucid Empire was what was left in the wake of Alexander the Great dying. It was a Hellenistic state, and because of that, they promoted the Hellenization of the area, trying to suppress traditional Jewish factions and Jewish values. The Seleucid Empire ran from 312 BC to 63 BC. Before that, Alexander the Great ruled over the area for about 11 years during his massive conquest, where the Macedonians conquered a huge chunk of land across the region. Before that, it was the Persian Empire under the dynasty of Achaemenid. He ruled it basically from 539 to 332 BC. Before that, it was the Babylonians under King Nebuchadnezzar from 605 to 539. This is where it gets interesting now. before the Babylonians, you had the kingdoms of Israel and Judea from 930 to 720 BC for Israel and 930 to 586 BC for Judea. Now, why there's two here is because they were separate kingdoms. They split from each other. And the term Jew comes from the people of Judea. They shortened it, they just were called Jews. Now, the kingdom of Israel was united under Saul, David, and Solomon. These were the ones that split in two, and this took place in that 930 BCE time period. But from 1020 to 930, it was Saul, David, and Solomon that ruled over the area, and they united all of the theocracies of the 12 tribes of Israel, and leading to the establishment of this northern kingdom. Now, when I talk about the kingdom of Israel, you have to understand, we're talking about 3,000 years ago, 1020. The people of Judea lived in 930 all the way until 586. The term Jews come from them. So we're talking thousands and thousands of years ago. Before the kingdom of Israel, there was the theocracy of the 12 tribes of Israel from the 13th to 11th century BC. And this, again, 3,300 years ago. The Israelite tribes settled in what was Canaan at the time after their exodus from Egypt, and were led by what is a series of biblical leaders that we've seen in the Bible, in the Old Testament as well as the Torah. And then before that, where we come to the kind of the end of written history here, the Canaanites occupied the territory, but ancient Canaan was a huge area, home to a lot of city-states and peoples. And Canaanites were just one of them. And they are frequently mentioned in things like Egyptian texts and Mesopotamian texts and Jewish texts and Christian texts. So when you talk about the total history of the region, going back through time, stopping at 75 years does it a huge injustice. But if you really want to get down to it, unless you can find any of the ancient peoples of the Canaanites, the tribes there, the true indigenous people of the region were the Jews out of Judea, under the kingdom of Judea and kingdom of Israel. And then after a series of conquests by the Egyptians, the Romans, the Persians, the British, the Ottomans, it's over that series of time. Yes, Palestine was created as a term by the Romans, but again, that was 1,100 years after it was occupied by the kingdom of Israel and Judea, and the kingdom that was united as from the 12 tribes of Israel. So that's the total history, not discounting Palestinian claims there, because Palestinians were named Palestinians after the Roman Empire. So they have a couple thousand years of history there too. But those were Palestinians by territory, Palestinian in name. There's Palestinian Jews, there's Palestinian Christians, there's Palestinian Muslims. Palestine as it stands today is not the indigenous people of the region. In fact, it was the Jews.